Hello and welcome back. This is the sixth episode of my Memoirs of a Fellow Traveller, in which I reflect on my experiences in life in the light of the wisdom and knowledge and understanding of reality and how we can be transformed into the kind of person we were created to be, that comes from the fourth way and the Enneagram symbol and the cosmic laws that that symbol represents. And of course, mostly it has to do with the law of seven, but a bit about the law of three too. I explain all of that in my fourth way Enneagram course, which is available for you, and to which you will see a link in the comments. But for now, I've just, well, to pick up from where I left off at a bit of a cliffhanger, really, because I'd had that extraordinary experience of falling in love with somebody, a Thai lady, and then having to recognize that something happened, something very, very major happened in my life as a result of that. In one sense, it was an implosion. It was a complete sort of my whole sense of identity and who I was and my mission in life suddenly had to change. And in fact, it was the beginning of what I would think is the most important stage of transformation that has actually enabled me to go beyond that. But it took some time. So I'll tell a little bit about the story, but before I do, I want to revisit that diagram which I began with, which I ended with at the last session, to say a little bit more about how I now understand what was going on. As I explained at the end of the last episode when I showed this diagram, the law of octaves, the law of seven is known as the law of octaves, because it's all based on the mathematics of music, actually, but the symbolic meaning of the numbers and the frequencies, etc. So without going into any further detail and explaining a whole lot, which you'd have to do my course to understand all of this, I just want to underscore the fact that when I had that experience of this being filled with the Spirit that got me past that first semitone hazard of adolescence, and launched me into, if you like, that enabled me to sort of gain that sense of identity and selfhood, but still that identity that was associated with evangelical charismatic Christianity. But nevertheless, and something new was starting at that point, which was and the very next stage, if you like, the second note of the second note of the octave, the re note, do re, which is parallel with the independence, identity, and selfhood point, is the principle of expansion, growth, and creativity in the spiritual sort of aspect of and emotional, because you're dealing with the emotional center here too, and the understanding of that. So there was much more of an experiential dimension to my faith. And that led on into activity, interaction, connection, which is all to do with how I engaged in mission, outreach, and that sort of thing. And that was what it was for me. And then, of course, I hit that semitone hazard, which I got to at the end of last point with that implosion thing. And suddenly I realized that actually I needed to start all over again. And that was the beginning of the third octave of the development of a true intellectual center. And I don't therefore mean just academic intellect, and I don't mean logic and reason. That had been functioning all right at an earlier stage, but it is a much more integrated and non-dual perspective of reality that had to develop at that point. And it involved, therefore, my doing the inner work. And as I did the inner work, and as I began to change my spiritual practices, which I will be talking about, so it's almost as though the divine attention, which had been there and accompanying me from all along, and the divine love and attention that had been actually surrounding me and supporting me all the way through, began to be much more deeply operative in my life, and that was the input of fresh energy. Now, again, I'm not going to go into any more detail other than to say that from in this episode, I will be dealing with how I got past that hazard point. So when we came back, we had to find a place to live, and in fact, what happened was we had two places to live. We came back to Rosedale Cottage, which is still our own sort of home, although Carol's by that time just her mother was living there and getting quite old and infirm. In fact, it would have been necessary for us to come back home to care for her as well. But we therefore built a cabin in the back. The cabin is that you can see. I can't see who's sitting in front of the cabin. It could be me, or it could be my son actually. But he helped us build it, and it was Carol's brother, also a twin brother, who's a builder, helped us to construct this cabin where we were able to live. It was a sort of self-contained unit. And the Diocese of Singapore very kindly had given us a kind of sabbatical year so that we had a time to find our feet again and to decide what to do next. Before this, Carol's twin brother, Chris, had bought a motorized yacht, a sort of motorized sailing yacht called Sylvander. And he, being a very skilled joiner, had completely refurbished it, got it back into seaworthy condition. And I think these photographs were taken while we were on holiday the summer before we came back to live in back in Scotland. And I'm having a go at the wheel there. But anyway, that came into it because when we arrived back, his business collapsed and there was something that happened and I can't remember the details. But anyway, he needed the money and asked us to buy Sylvander. And we had the means at the time from inheritance, I think, to buy the boat and actually lived on board. So here is Sylvander moored just above the Crinan Basin on the Crinan Canal. And there I am on the deck enjoying the evening sunshine and reading a book. This was all part of during our year of sabbatical. One of the things we had to do that year was to completely repaint the hull and also to recork the decks. The decks were leaking badly, and so we had to try and do something about that so that we could continue staying on board. Well, Chris was the more well, he acquired the skills necessary to sail the boat through the Crinan Canal, and so we were just crew on board while he took us through to Helensburgh, I think it was, and in dry dock, and we spent a week. Myself, Chris, and some friends of his, and work colleagues, and my son Julian also coming to help us too. And there I am, busy with sanding the decks, and you can see the before and after pictures. The repainting had all taken place across in the others, so across in Helensburgh, and so we'd actually sailed there by going through the Crinan Canal. Out through Loch Gilphead and then off to around Loch Fyne and through the Tinnabrugh and the Kyles of Bute and then on to Helensburgh. Very, very pretty journey, by the way. And here we are sailing her back to her mooring. Well, towards the end of my sabbatical year, the Bishop of Edinburgh got hold of me. Well, I remember going up with Carol to meet him, and eventually he said to us, well, actually, Ken, there's a church that you might fit, but they're looking for a part-time rector, and I was looking for a part-time post, mainly because I knew I had to spend some time recovery, but also because I was working for a Time magazine and I needed to do that work, so I took on a post that was actually just 3/4 of the full-time post, which is all that they could afford to employ as a local congregation. In the Scottish Episcopal Church, each congregation is responsible for the stipend of its own rector, unlike the Church of England. So There we were. There we were. It was the beginning of 15 years of ministry in Christchurch Duns, the longest I had been anywhere, and either of us had lived anywhere in the whole time of our marriage. And it was a very stable period of time during which a lot happened in terms of my own personal growth. I had been quite open with the people who had interviewed me, the panel from from the church that had interviewed me for before I was appointed as the rector at Christchurch, about what had happened in Thailand, and I was quite moved by the fact that they felt that I was the right person um, for the post. But I did find it very, very difficult to really feel at home back in the UK. I think I would have found it even more difficult in England, to be honest. But so I had a lifetime visa, in a Thai visa, which meant that I could keep it for as long as I liked. I could go back for as long as I liked, whenever I liked, providing I didn't. I returned to the country at least once in every 12 months, and so I carried on doing that. Being a little bit uncertain as to how long term this time in the UK would be, and hoping, I suppose, in the back of my mind that in retirement or something, I'd go back and be able to carry on doing some sort of ministry there. I don't know, but I remember feeling very out of place, and the I remember going to the occasions when they were installing a new rector in one of the congregations in the borders, and all the clergy from the borders were gathered together in the vestry or wherever it is. We put our robes on for the occasion, and feeling totally out of it, and feeling I just don't belong in this group. But there were a number of things that helped. For a start, the clergy group that used to meet, we call them a chapter meeting, about every 3 months or so. When I first moved there, didn't really kind of I didn't click with what was going on. It seemed to be fairly superficial, but with some changes that took place in the personnel, and I don't know whether I'd said something, but anyway, it gradually began to form, to function as a sort of peer supervision group and a support group, which I found extremely helpful. Then there was another thing that I found helpful, and that was what I'm going to talk about in the next slide. One of the things that helped me, I think, to root me here again was I had discovered there was a training course, an ongoing professional training development, if you like, run by the Epiphany Group, a group of that was formed in 2000. I've got this bit from their website here, bringing together women and men who've been trained and practiced Ignatian spirituality in Scotland and beyond. And members of the Epiphany Group are lay and ordained, belong to different church Christian traditions, and they were offering training courses in spiritual accompaniment and spiritual direction. It's more accurately spiritual accompaniment, actually, but there was a 3-year course. They felt I didn't need the first year, which was all about prayer and reflective living, and I was then put into the second year and the second and third year. And it was during during 2003, I think it was my very first year doing that, that something else happened that which really was very deeply touching. Now, what had happened is that in one of my trips to Thailand, I'd done a handstand by a swimming pool, and I don't know whether that was what triggered it, but afterwards I noticed something odd, a sort of flickering in my right eye, and then after that, when I was back in the UK, and my right eye suddenly went blind, I lost the sight, and that was on a Sunday. I noticed it on a Sunday afternoon walk, and I went to the GP on Monday morning, and he had a look at it quickly, and then he sent me straight up to the Edinburgh Eye Pavilion to see the consultant there because he saw there was something suspicious in it. And then the consultant told me, well, I think you've got a malignant melanoma in your right eye, which is a very serious condition. But within 2 weeks, I had that operated at the Gart Naval Hospital in Glasgow, which is the centre for um, this particular specialty of oncology in the eye. That's treating cancers of the eye in Scotland. And I am so impressed by the efficiency of the NHS in Scotland. And incidentally, despite all the problems that you hear about in the news, it's still pretty good compared to what I hear about in England. And certainly that's my experience of it. Anyway, the nurse, after I'd been diagnosed, took me aside. We had a conversation. He said, well, I've got to be straight with you, Ken. Carol was with me, and she said, I think you've got a 1 in 7 chance of surviving this, so we'll be supporting you. And I mean, that was a sort of blow. But I took it in a very, I'm afraid I'm a bit sort of optimistic. I said, great, I've got a 7 in 1 chance of surviving. So my attitude was, I'll survive this, whatever, and I'll fight this. And they were, as I say, quick to operate. They put a radiant plaque in. I lost most of the vision in my right eye as a result of that, but I could still drive okay after I'd adjusted to all the sort of fact that I initially had some double vision, but it was fine. So anyway, when I'd heard that news, the very first day I heard the news, I was feeling a bit sort of numb, and I didn't know quite how to process it. And I was due to have one of the sessions in a place called the House of Prayer in Nile Grove in Edinburgh in Morningside, where this course was being held. And I had some time to kill on my way back from Glasgow. So I went into the Canny Man pub, which is Morningside. Those who come from Edinburgh will know it. It's a famous pub. And I went and sat down in an armchair, and in a sort of small little alcove, which I just wanted some privacy. I wanted to be alone and be quiet and reflect. And the proprietor came round and saw me and said, I'm sorry, you can't sit there, mate. I keep that chair for those who are too drunk to and inebriated and need to be sort of allowed a place to recover. So he conducted me round to another alcove. It's full of little alcoves and places to sit and eat and drink. And there's nobody else in that alcove either, actually. It was a small little sort of dining room chair, well, a small table with chairs around it. And the Canny Man all the walls of Canny Man are filled with all kinds of antiques and artifacts and paint, pictures and things. And I looked up, and on the wall was a plaque which read some words on which were some words of scripture, so well and often repeated: "Fear not, for I am with you." Or I think it was probably fear not, for I am with thee, in the old King James version. And it really it was like a direct message from God. I just felt, wow. And I felt such an incredible sense of, again, divine love surrounding me in these difficult circumstances. So anyway, that carried me through. I completed the course after 2 years, and then there was a few things unfortunately, during my recovery, I missed a few sessions. But that really was so helpful. The other thing that happened during my early time at Christchurch Duns is I took myself off to a psychotherapist, and I had 3 years of psychotherapy, which helped me to begin to integrate this extraordinary experience I'd had, this paradoxical experience of going off the rails and yet at the same time being surrounded and experiencing a sort of unity with the divine in a strange way, and it shouldn't have been. So, and then starting that shadow work, the work of actually beginning to integrate the stuff and allow the stuff that was beneath the surface, maybe even from my boarding school days and my upbringing as a very strict evangelical Christian, and allowing me to explore all of that. Well, after I'd completed that course with the Epiphany group, um, and I'd been reading quite widely and beginning to really sort of try and re-understand my faith afresh. And that I came across some books by, I think it was called The Prayer of the Cosmos. It was the one of the first books I read by Neil Douglas Klotz, um, and he was talking about the Aramaic Jesus. He had a PhD in the hermeneutics of ancient Middle Eastern languages. That means how to interpret them. And these Semitic languages, that's whether it's the Hebrew, Aramaic that Jesus spoke, or a Coptic, and including the Arabic language, is much more feminine than the Greek in which the New Testament is written. And of course, Jesus spoke Aramaic. He never spoke Greek, as far as we know. And certainly that was the medium in which he taught his followers. And so as I discovered that Neil Douglas Klotz, who actually at that time lived in Edinburgh, although he was American originally from the States, and but he was really a Sufi mystic as well. Anyway, I discovered he was putting on a course called the Avun Interspiritual Leadership Program. I think it's called ALIP, and he was putting it on in Wiston Lodge, which is about a couple of hours or even less than a 2 hours drive away from where I was in the Scottish borders, closer towards Lanark, where I'd been, where we had been before. So I signed up for this, and it was going to be a course in which we were going to delve into the inner meaning of these languages and these ancient texts, both in Hebrew and Genesis and many other places in the scriptures, and also in the New Testament in the Aramaic language, and then right across into other ancient texts, and then of course the Quran as well. So when I went on that course, the first time that we met together, there was a very mixed group of people. We got to know each other really well and got on with each other really well. But they were from a variety of like Christian or non-Christian traditions, and but many of them perhaps wouldn't count themselves as in any way Orthodox Christians. In fact, there was a Jewish. I think there were some that were Jewish. There were some that were would have had a sort of Sufi kind of. They were identified with the Sufi movement, which is the sort of mystical movement. It was rooted before Islam. That's another story. But and then there was a Jewish people as well. So the three Abrahamic faiths were represented there. And I remember one Jewish lady who flew all the way from Australia twice a year for this event. And these people came from all across the globe, by the way. And she introduced herself and said, well, I'm a Jewish faith, but I discovered Jesus through the and through the Aramaic Lord's Prayer. She didn't know it was the Lord's Prayer. She just discovered this text that Neil had translated, and then discovered that after all, it went back to Jesus, the person who's at the center of the Christian faith. But, so she sort of said, well, I've just sort of fallen in love with Jesus as a result of this, because Avun, which is the first, it was called Avun Interspiritual Leadership Program. And Avun is the first word in Aramaic of the Lord's Prayer, Avun de Bishmaya, our Father who art in heaven. And the rich meaning of that word, which means, could be translated quite easily, O Bertha, Father, Mother of the Cosmos, whose presence is made known in the entire created cosmos, it's just unbelievable. Anyway, I found this so helpful. So we spent time together, and not only in terms of understanding the text, but chanting, meditating, getting the meaning of the text into our bodies through circle dances, Sufi dances of various kinds and music that Neil had actually composed. And of course, the point being that Jesus himself probably taught his disciples in that sort of way, even though the actual form that we were learning didn't go back to Jesus. Anyway, that was a formative period in my for 4 years. Well, both my experience of and what I learned through about Ignatian spirituality and faith accompaniment, and my experience with Neil Douglas Klotz in the Abrun Interspiritual Leadership Training Program, initiated me into very different ways of um, connecting with the divine, with God, and I therefore found myself engaging in much more contemplative kinds of prayer, um, enjoying meditation, and indeed incorporating it into my everyday life. Meditative practices that were both um, Far Eastern in the sense of like mindfulness practices, that's Buddhist kind of practices, and also through the Sufis movement, other practices, and then the dance movements and everything like that. So it all became very much richer than my previous way of prayer, and this idea that I was sort of, well, very much um, asking God to do things and to intervene in situations, expecting the God that was outside of the realm of the ordinary to come and sort of do miraculous stuff. I mean, as I've told you, that there was miraculous stuff happening. There was undoubtedly, but my mode of prayer differed completely, and it was very much more centering and discovering that God is right there all the time, present in the present moment. And what was key was me becoming more present to the present moment, to myself, to others, and to God. So that was one thing. And I mean, I'm not going to talk about the details of all of that, but that was an ever evolving and ever exploratory journey, basically, which I'm still doing. The other thing was previously I did a lot of study and Bible study, but also reading and intellectual reading. But my reading went much wider and broader. Now, I'd had to encounter different ways of understanding the Christian faith, and different ways of understanding scripture and interpreting scripture through my theological training. So I had many questions that I should have been asking far more deeply that were sort of now needing to be addressed. And um, so I'm not going to talk about a lot of the reading because I think what I'm going to do is have to have another episode rather, at the end of this, when I talk a little bit more about what has influenced me and what has enabled me to grow forward and to grow into a far fuller, more rounded, more integrated human being, hopefully. But I'm still on the way, obviously. But I'll say a little bit more about that at the end. But I'm going to leave that for the time being. Actually, it wasn't until about 2015, I think, that I really began to dig more deeply and become much more curious about the Enneagram, which, of course, I was introduced to way back in 1994 as a curate when I was in Cheltenham. But it was taught in a way that didn't. I mean, I mistyped myself, put it bluntly, but I then began to understand through doing courses online and reading books by the famous, well-known authors like Russ Hudson, Jessica Dibb, and Beatrice Chestnut, and many others actually. I began to understand something of what had driven me in the past about and the passions and why, as I said in the earlier video, how Carol and I, it was a miracle that we'd actually stayed together at all because my kind of withdrawing into my head and emotionally distancing myself, which was something very much part of the sort of five personality, and not therefore feeling able to give myself emotionally to others in a full way had been such a problem for Carol, for whom emotion, being in touch with emotions and connecting with other people, trying to help them, but also perhaps somewhat demanding recognition and appreciation in a way which I found it quite difficult to give. Um, and so both of us had to learn, and I think both of us benefited from um, uh, doing the work, the sort of Enneagram stuff. And I didn't start teaching it actually really until after I had retired. But that was an important building block as well. Well, the other thing that I did whilst I was at Christchurch Duns was get involved with politics far more. Years ago, when I was a doctor at Law Hospital, before we went out to Thailand, I had become a member of the Liberal Party. I was always wanting to be a bit alternative in that way, and never quite fitted with the a conservative view. My father was a committed conservative voter, probably all his life. He that's just him. But so I'd obviously left all that aside, and then suddenly I met the Michael Moore, who was the member of Parliament for our in the Scottish borders where we were, and he eventually actually went on to be a Scottish secretary at one point. But anyway, I got to meet him, got to know him, and got involved, and I became the treasurer of the local of the party indeed, and then eventually in 2000 and I think it was 11, it was after the disastrous coalition with the Conservatives that I stood for election as a local councillor. I had great fun visiting all sorts of houses and talking to all sorts of people throughout East Berwickshire, which is the ward I was standing for. But because of the disaster between the coalition and what had happened, and the fact that there'd been compromises taken to our stances, I didn't get elected. And the Scottish National Party got in instead because the Labour Party candidate stood as well, and he took away some of my votes. There hadn't been a Labour Party candidate before then. So anyway, cut the long story short, the bishop then got in touch with me and said, "Oh, Ken, I'm so glad you didn't get elected. I think I've got a job for you." And I had to attend an interview and all the rest of it. But I was then appointed as the diocesan ministry development officer, trying to coordinate the training of authorized ministry in the diocese. That means lay readers and people who are training for ordained ministry. It involved leading seminars in the evening and doing all the reading that the students were doing, making sure that they were out on the right kind of placements, and then leading seminars with the bishop actually to do with formation of ministry and that sort of thing. I discovered that fitted me, that fitted my personality far better than anything else I'd done. I discovered a place, a niche. Even though some of the stuff I had to teach I would have rather done it in a completely different, or had a different approach to it. I was constrained by the constructs of the material with which I had to work. Then finally, there was one other thing too that's coming to my mind, and I can't remember it now. Well, so I still was part-time rector at Christchurch Duns. I'd gone down to only half time there and half time in the diocese, but I was doing a lot of travelling to and from, and because the seminars were in the evening, often having to be up there too, and coming back late. And then I was also elected to the General Synod and on. I think it was during a general's after the final evening of the general's, or on the final day of the general synod. I'd actually missed the last session because I had a funeral to attend in as a member of our congregation's son had sadly died, and I was attended the funeral, and this was lunchtime, and then I had to drive back, and it was, I think it was Queen's Jubilee or something like that that I was preparing for on the Sunday, and it was 2016. It was during the Brexit debate, and I was listening to the radio, um, getting thoroughly hot under the collar and wanting to argue with everybody, and then all the rest of it. Um, I mean, I was very undecided at that. Well, at that point, I was totally committed to staying in Europe, and got very annoyed with the Brexit people who are telling a pack of lies, as we now know. But anyway, I fell asleep on the wheel at the wheel, and I had a nasty accident. Luckily, I my car turned over, and I fractured I fractured several bones. I was fractured hip two places, my sacrum and the sternum, and but fortunately nothing was displaced. The first car that passed me was that of a policeman who lived in the village just near to where I crashed, and so he was able to call the emergency services immediately, and I was treated very well in the Borders General Hospital. Um, so that was a sort of another. It set me aside for about 3 months in 2016, and that was when I heard the result of the Brexit of the referendum. Um, and while I was lying in hospital, I staring at my thigh because that's all I could. I couldn't move very much. I was in so much pain. Um, I'd noticed a tiny little mole on my leg, which, being a medical doctor, I thought, no, that looks a little bit suspicious. And indeed, it turned out to be a melanoma. Now, the melanoma in my eye and the melanoma in the skin actually, they're melanomas, but they reckon to be caused by different things. But never mind. I noticed it early enough, and fortunately, with the surgeon was able to whip it out while I was there. And he said to me afterwards, "Well, you're jolly lucky because it hasn't penetrated the epidermis at all." And he did a wide excision and all the rest of it, and um, I'm completely free. And and the other amazing thing is that my other melanoma now, I've had it for. I'm reckoned to be completely free of all of that. So amazing how these things happen. Another serendipitous thing that if I hadn't had the accident, I wouldn't have noticed the melanoma. Goodness me, God wants me alive for some reason. Why on earth, I don't know, but there we are. Hopefully, I'm doing some good in life and blessing some people now. Anyway, we had to retire at the age of 70, so that was in May 2017. And so we had, by that time, were able to have the assets or the means, thankfully, through my father's the fact that my father had left us an inheritance of a property in the Upper Woodcote estate, was able to therefore sell that. That's another long story I won't go into. And then we purchased this property in Edinburgh, where, because of my work and the amount of time I'd spent there, I felt I had some connections, some people I knew. For Carol, it was much more of a difficult transition, but she eventually settled in. We had a beautiful flat in a modern development overlooking the Firth of Forths. That was the view from our living room window. And then the New Haven Harbour, the top left, where we were able to. There were so many cafes, restaurants, and things. Very different lifestyle in the city. We enjoyed it immensely and made many, many friends there too, both in the development. I became the secretary and then ultimately the chairman of the Owners Association of the development in which we lived, 278 flats and properties rather. And so that was an interesting sort of time. But it was during that time that I think a tremendous amount of reading and investigating and delving into the Enneagram took place. Well, because of the stuff I'd been developing in my understanding of the Enneagram, and I'd hosted, I should say, a course that, in fact, that was an online course for a few members of the congregation where we started attending St James Leith, which was a very interesting, creative congregation. I won't go into the details of that. You can find them on the website, but on their website. But then I got involved with doing stuff with the Edinburgh International Centre for Spirituality and Peace. And Neil Douglas Klotz was one of the board members, but Neil Walker, the sort of chief executive officer, got me involved in doing stuff as well as I attended a number of events that they ran. But I found it very useful because it was again the kind of interfaith, interspiritual organization. And the other organization I became a member of was the Scientific and Medical Network, which was really an organization concerned with the far deeper understanding of science in its relation to spirituality, and integrating the wisdom of the ancient traditions with modern science. And I found a lot of interesting stuff. So I attended conferences like Beyond the Brain. Well, I won't go into all the details of these stories, but suffice it to say that eventually I ended up exploring not just the Enneagram of personality, but realizing that actually there was another Enneagram, the Enneagram as Gurdjieff first taught it, which was actually quite different. And I explain in the courses what the difference is. And this is, of course, out of this is what I'm doing my reflection now in these series of videos. So I'm going to show you the next slide. Well, not long after I had retired, and Carol and I had moved to Edinburgh. My son, who lives in this village of Tarland on the edge of the Cairngorms National Park in Royal Deeside, he'd been there for many years. His wife had left him, and so we were frequently up there to help with him and caring for children. And so eventually we got a static caravan in their caravan site on the edge of the village, a very lovely, well organized, well laid out caravan park, and quite small. So we often used to stay and visit. And meanwhile, Jules, our son, found a lovely new girlfriend, and Mary, American citizen, has been in Aberdeen for many years. And the village of Tarland was such a lively place. I mean, I think this is the Queen's Jubilee celebration, taken in the square at Tarland. But eventually the time came when we began to realize that we needed to be there much more, and we began seriously looking for a place to live in the village of Tarland. And eventually one day we found this house. It was in August 2022, just a minute's walk from the square, and it just suited exactly what we were looking for. We got to know the couple, a lovely couple, who she owned the house, and they got married late in life after he'd lost his former wife, and she'd been divorced many years. So lovely couple, we got to know them, and we put an offer in, but there were so many obstacles in the way. It was unbelievable how difficult it was for us to actually sell our place and then purchase this property called Tomnaveri. But at every step where we hit an obstacle, and then it was crucial moments, such as when we put the offer in, and we were told by our solicitor, "There's no way they'll accept your offer because you haven't got you're not a cash buyer. They'll go for a cash buyer." We saw this double rainbow, and it happened on maybe at least three occasions when we hit various obstacles, and it sort of was a sign to us, I think, that we were on the right track, and we should just hold on. and unknown to us until after we moved and we had a talk. We were chatting with the couple from whom we bought the property. Um, she told us that she had been to a clairvoyant friend of hers who had told her that the couple from Edinburgh would put in the highest bid, and but it would go to the wire. It would be the last minute sort of completion, and indeed it was. And they really needed to sell by a certain date in 2023, and we just managed to get there. And we only discovered afterwards that, in fact, they had very much felt that we were the right couple for the village. Other people had put an offer in, maybe it would have been a holiday home or something for somebody, but they felt that we would be a positive benefit to the local community, which I hope we are being right now. Tom Naviri, the house, which is the last one in the row that you see on the left in that road, which is called Bridge Street in Thailand, is named after a 4,500-year-old stone circle. And I've often been up there and find it lovely. Walk in the morning. It's time to just be quiet, meditate for a short few minutes before going back and having breakfast. And these are a few photographs of the stone circle as well. So we eventually moved here at the end of April 2023, and here is this village, a photograph taken by somebody in a drone, with a drone, I think, and our village is the Thailand Development Group is very active in the village, and that's our house is with the arrow there at the edge of the village, and our son lives on the other side of the village at the top end of the village. And it's an amazing community, I have to say. So I'll talk more about that in the next. So anyway, our house is 1 minute walk from the local pharmacy, 2 minutes walk from the local convenience store, and there's a post office there as well. There's a lovely pub. There's a there's a pub anyway. I wouldn't say it was lovely, but it's where the locals go, and where they have a live music night every Tuesday. And then there's the hotel, slightly sort of more upmarket, where we've had a few meals, especially when we just moved in. But the most important thing about the village is the sense of community that there is here. And we decided that we needed to get stuck in to get to know people. So we joined the local Thailand Development Group, became members. We attended the lovely music and food and music festival that they put on every year. And in fact, in the May of this year, I was involved in speaking at the final event at the Cool Church, a tiny little chapel about 2 miles away, in which the final event was taking place, speaking about Celtic Christianity and nature, and just as a short talk there, and then just getting involved with the local church. Now that's been a strange experience in some ways, because it's much more traditional than the church that we love and got involved with in Edinburgh. But we felt it was the right way to get involved with local people, and indeed it's proved the case. And now we're hosting they have a Bible study group as well, just like we had in Duns, and prayer group as well. And there's a lovely people there. They now meet in our house. We just host it. We don't lead it or run it in any way. And there's a great deal of variety in terms of Christian viewpoints and opinions and experience in that small group of 12 people, mainly men, only 2 women, 10 men and 2 women, when everybody turns up. Unusual in church circles, but they're very interesting. And so we're thoroughly immersed in our local community. But also, quite soon after I moved here, I began to teach the Fourth Way Enneagram course, which I've been referring to. And here's the next slide shows the what's been on. So the Fourth Way Enneagram course, which I began to teach online to a group of people all over that was coming from all over the world, not large numbers, but certainly from quite a wide um, variety of backgrounds and places. But what I was trying to do was introduce the teachings of Gurdjieff on his fourth way in the Enneagram in order to facilitate the process of personal transformation. As I say, this was hosted by the Edinburgh International Centre for Spirituality and Peace. I was the facilitator. So that went on as a weekly live session for 6 weeks, and it's now the recording. I've done a whole lot of recordings, and I've got other material which I send people, and people are still registering to do it in though not live. To conclude this episode, I want to return to this diagram, the basic Enneagram diagram. And before I say anything about this, to say that the Enneagram, the process Enneagram, can be applied at all different kinds of levels. And when I talked about the the three octaves at the beginning, that really, to understand that, you've got to do my course, that is all about the process of the transformation of energies and how energies become more and more subtle through if I start talking about it, it'll just take far too long. So this is simply applying the process Enneagram to the overall process of the evolution, the involution and evolution of a single life. And I say involution because you have to involve, is becoming much more dense, if you like, the downward movement on the right hand side there, and then you evolve upwards into a more refined and subtle until you get to the fully integrated person, where the what is the undeveloped essence is actually completely and 100% there. And in fact, I think that there are very, very few human beings that get there. And of course, Jesus, I believe, was one of them. And the essence of his divinity lies in his humanity. He was the complete human being, the divine human being that we were all created to be and become. Right? And so at this point, what has happened is I've taken you through how I got past that midlife crisis at the hazard point, at point 6 of the Enneagram cycle, when shadow work was needed. A paradigm shift takes place, a completely different way of understanding reality. And I'm going to talk about that in the final episode the next time. What is that paradigm shift? How do I see things, and what has contributed to the growth in that sort of understanding? And then so that I can become a far more inclusive person, where at this point the note La in the cycle, or number 7 of the Enneagram numbers, the principle of pattern and ordering is where the spiritual DNA, the divine DNA with which we are born, is beginning to be much more fully manifest in the patterns of one's life and the way that one orders one's life. And that's where I feel I'm sort of, that's where I've arrived, and yet I haven't arrived, if you see what I mean, because in fact you're constantly having to learn something new, and there's not a smooth process at all. And I don't consider myself to have arrived in any sense at all, because you only arrive at the end of your life, actually. And when the person that is the real you, the soul that is that subtle body that therefore exists outside of space and time, continues in a new dimension. Oh, and that is a good place to finish this episode. And in the final episode, which will be quite a short one, I'll be talking about the paradigm shift, and how I got there, and what books and people have helped me to see that a little bit more clearly. So bye for now.